So this is the second part of the diagnosis of the Fleet Street media, Friday the 25th of September 2020. So looking at the Guardian, they have got this item about the Alexandra Wilson, the black barrister, mixed race black barrister, I think that would be fair to say. The head of the court service in England and Wales has apologized to a black barrister after she was stopped and mistaken for a defendant 3 times in one day at court. So Kevin Sadler, the acting chief executive of HM Courts and Tribunal Service, has condemned the totally unacceptable behavior and promised to investigate the complaint made by Alexandra Wilson, who specializes in criminal and family cases. So this is not the run-of-the-mill kind of item. The head of the court service is hardly ever even known as an entity that exists. So the fact that this particular individual has come out and has condemned the unacceptable behavior shows the importance that is being given to this particular case. This is not the last of this case. We'll be hearing a lot more about this. And the reason why the papers are doing this will be also kind of become more evident than it has been so far in the coverage today. And the piece in the Guardian is longer than the piece as equivalent pieces published in the other papers. And this is the one that will have more kind of contents in the run of things, in the general run of things. Amanda Pinto, QC, chair of the Bar Council, said, "I fear Alexandra's experience is not a one-off. Many barristers have to put up with the prejudiced assumptions of others. Alexandra has done so with exemplary grace and patience. I'm speaking directly with HMCTS, the Senior Judiciary and CPS, Crown Prosecution Service, immediately, urging more to be done to stamp out this behavior. The barrister's profession is always striving to be more representative of society it serves. There is more to do to change the perception of the bar, but that is no excuse for the kind of attitude and remarks described. We are not all white, middle-class men." So that is a long spiel being attributed to Amanda Pinto, QC, chair of the Bar Council. Now, this is the kind of hint of why this is being given such a coverage, quite apart from the fact of the background and the racial kind of background of the particular licensed law trader. Now, they are talking about the treatment in court of a licensed law trader. Remember that is not to be forgotten. Most people who have experience of going to court, and most black people who have experience of going to court, are treated much worse than this particular individual has been treated as. So much so that the entire life's work of black people are being completely destroyed by the prejudice of the courts and the licensed law traders. That is the lesson, that is the evidence, that is the findings of Anthony Thornton, QC, who published his ruling on the 14th of October 2014 in favor of the litigant in person, AA, against the Sadak Bar Council. And the fact that the court system took so long, before that man was vindicated is only a tip of the iceberg of the obstructions that black people face. The AA is a black person of either Sudanese or Somalian or Eritrean background. His full identity has not been disclosed, but that is where he comes from. And the fact that he was treated as a criminal and his life's work were destroyed, taken away, and dumped shows the extent of criminality that can be perpetrated by under the kind of legal kind of banner and badge. The local council as an elected council and its employees have got the stamp of legitimacy around them, about them. So their behavior cannot be just overturned. They have to be put through a process of rigorous judicial test and examination, and that is not available. That kind of test and the access to the courts to do that kind of test is rarely available. So what we are looking at in this case of Alexander Wilson is a very rare incident indeed. And the reason why the mainstream media, the Fleet Street, has mentioned this case is more to do with the fact that she is a member of the licensed law traders profession, not a member of the public. If she were a member of the public, she would not have been given this coverage. And we shall come to the A to Z of the destruction that have been caused by Henrietta Manners, a district judge in the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court, and her co-conspirator racist, Judith Goodman, a deputy district judge and a licensed solicitor. And the lies that they perpetrated, the lies that they committed were measurable and are measurable in the destruction of the very serious work that they have caused. And there was no wrong. There was nothing wrong done by the target of, and the victim of their abuse of their power in the courts. So this Alexander Wilson has not lost any money, has not been forced out of our home or anything like that. So compare that with the effect of the prejudice and racism and hostility shown by Henrietta Manners and Judith Goodman and the other unnamed invisible persons involved with them in the conspiracy, racistly motivated conspiracy to destroy the life's work of a person who was a litigant, but was not a litigant accused of any crime or wrongdoing. The chain of events that entailed the destruction, the chain of events that led to the matter being taken to court, were started by a racist called Mike Tyrrell. Mike Tyrrell, 10 years before he took over as one of the criminally organized outfits being given control over thousands of Tower Hamlets Council housing properties, Mike Tyrrell was in place, in post as an employee, as a manager in the housing section in Bethnal Green South in the London Borough of Tower Hamlets Council. And while he was in that post, a member of the community, a Bangladeshi young person called Dilwar, was so severely attacked by a gang of racists near his home of the old Bethnal Green Road that word reached the community and a campaign was launched against the racist attack. And the campaigners had to identify the properties as belonging to the Tower Hamlets Council. And when that identification was done and the council was asked to explain its behavior and apologize and to stop the races, Mike Tyrrell, as a manager in the housing section, took it upon himself to interpret that totally wrongly, without any foundation whatsoever, that the very fact of the racist, anti-racists, and the people campaigning against the racist attack constituted such a grievous wrong that he decided to target the organizer of the campaign, whom he wanted to get evicted from their own council flat. There was no wrong done by the organizer of the campaign against racist attack. So this happened in 1996 in Tower Hamlets. So anyone who is familiar with Tower Hamlets Borough and anyone who is familiar with the long pleas for money made by Tower Hamlets Council as a ritual every year, and anyone who is familiar with the various explanations given by the various series of leaders of the council justifying their failures to serve the community, and the main running theme in the pleas for money being that if there is not enough money, then and the central government is to blame, whatever the central government was. But in this case, the Tower Hamlets Council was allowing Michael Tyrrell to start a racistly motivated, criminally intended campaign of harassment against a perfectly legal and lawfully resident council tenant during the last year of the Conservative government in 1996. Mike Tyrrell circulated a memo dated the 23rd of December 1996, and he circulated the memo to two council employees. He circulated it to others, but the two that can be mentioned in context because they were most closely connected with the plot to secure the eviction of an innocent tenant. Not only was the tenant innocent, but the tenant was doing something absolutely moral and ethical and totally highly desirable and necessary for the protection of the basic rights of the people being targeted by racists attacking them. So that tenant should never have been targeted, but he was. And the agenda that Michael Tyrrell had set in 1996 in December needed the cooperation and support of other employees in the council. For some reason, that support didn't come through at that time. But eventually, Mike Tyrrell and others succeeded in ganging up against council housing idea in order to gain control of the council housing altogether. If Michael Tyrrell couldn't evict one anti-racist campaigner, then he would like to have a control over the whole lot of properties belonging to Tower Hamlets Council so that he could take racist revenge against others as well who dared to complain about racism, disrepair, and other things. So by the time in 2006 that Michael Tyrrell got hold of the control of the property in which the campaigner was living at that time in Bethnal Green, he began immediately to issue series of eviction notices. And the eviction harassment continued for another 5 years until Michael Tyrrell was allowed to evict this person for no reason other than the fact that he had the co-conspirator based at the Tower Hamlets Council as the benefit manager, Steve Hill, who conspired to create an arrear pretext against the particular targeted campaigner against racist attacks. So the two of them were aided and abetted by the local DWP, and therefore they withheld the money that was owed to the lawfully active and lawfully resident campaigner against racism. So they created a pretext, a temporary pretext of rent arrears. There was no rent arrears because the active campaigner was owed £1,500 by Tower Hamlets Community Housing at the time. Nothing to do with the housing benefit that the council was legally obliged to pay to the tenant, and whose housing benefit was withheld, suspended, stopped by Steve Hill as routine. Steve Hill stopped the housing benefit over about 20 separate occasions in the course of few years. There is no way that any arrears was caused by the tenant doing anything wrong or anything illegal. So the housing benefit was used as an instrument of violating the legal rights, lawful rights of the person whose only wrongdoing was that they were campaigning against racist attacks on other people. So this campaigner was targeted by racists who decided to deprive the campaigner of his own house and the contents of the house, the possessions, most of the possessions of their lives, written work and other exclusive documents and materials and archives. So what happened was that the campaign to stop the racist attack ended up in more racist attacks being mounted by the Tower Hamlets Council. One ex-housing manager and the current chief executive of the organization that had been given the control of the council housing stock, and the current, at the time current that is, the benefits manager and the DWP. All of them were behaving illegally against a perfectly legally active person. So all of that evidence should be looked at in comparison with this statement in The Guardian today on page 22, where the court service head apologizes after a black barrister is mistaken for defendant. The Tower Hamlets Council, Steve Hill, and the Tower Hamlets Community Housing, Mike Tyrrell, and the Tower Hamlets Council employee, Colin Cormack, Tower Hamlets Council employee, Keith Tower Hamlets Council employee Keith Brown, who is now an employee in the Tower Hamlets homes. All these racists and all these liars mistook the perfectly highly moral and highly legal and lawfully active campaigner against racism as somebody else, as a wrong person, because they considered campaigning against racism as a wrong in Tower Hamlets Council in the 1990s, in 2006. So all of these evidence must be stacked up on the one side against the bogus words of outrage being attributed to Amanda Pinto, chair of the Bar Council, and others, because they don't have any care or concern about the abuse that takes place every time, every sitting, by the magistrates, by the district judges, deputy district judges, and other staff in the county court. Now, what happened, as I was saying in part one of today's diagnosis of the media, in July 2011, let me just find this representative examples of the communications, representation, advocacy filed to the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court And we shall see just how widespread, open racist breaking of the law has been allowed to take place in this country. Now, in the years that followed the racist conspiracy by Steve Hill, Mike Tyrrell, and others against the campaigner against racist attacks, there were several communications to the court. And there was a complaint in 2011 against Henrietta Manners. The district judge Henrietta Manners involved in a historic campaign, and it is exactly what the anniversary, like 26th of September 2011. So it's like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So 9 years ago, this was an email sent to the complainant from the Judicial Office for Judicial Complaints. And it's signed by, in the name of somebody called Natasha Kumalo, whatever the nationality of that person was. So Natasha Kumalo sent this letter, and she kind of was in denial about the complaints against District Judge Manners. That was 9 years ago. And the complaint was summarized in her way by Natasha Kumalo in her email of the 26th of September 2011. It says that this letter explains that having assessed your complaint, we cannot take further action. It says that in summary, you have complained that DJ Manners has abused her position for years, etc., etc. Specifically, you complained that DJ Manners was incompetent, negligent, and prejudiced in reaching a decision, and that she is a racist, which you say was evidence in the fact that she failed to take the facts of the case into account. And she said that this cannot be. I'm sorry that it has not been possible to investigate your complaint. And it goes on. I'm sparing the viewer most of the details, but that's the basic kind of fact, this email from the Judicial Complaints Office dated the 26th of September, that is tomorrow, 9 years tomorrow, 2011. It was responding to a complaint against Henrietta Manners, who sat as district judge both in the Shoreditch County Court before it got merged with the Clerkenwell and Shoreditch County Court, and also since Clerkenwell took over the Shoreditch County Court. And this Manners, Henrietta Manners, full of racist manners and prejudice, sat in a case brought by Mike Tyrrell to evict the campaigner against racism. And that was done in 2011. And all the representations, all the communications, the emails and everything sent to the court prior to the hearing of the application for eviction brought by Mike Tyrrell and others were ignored. They're all facts. They were facts then 11 years ago, and they have been fact since and throughout the last 11 years. And the point is that this coverage on Friday, the 25th of September 2020, in favor of Alexandra Wilson, the black barrister they're describing her, is a complete, utter exception, and it is not in any way representative of the behavior and the policies and the practices of the racist judges and the racist staff in the courts. Because this shows that the Bar Council's chairman or chairperson, Amanda Pinto, QC, is up in arms against the person who reportedly misbehaved against Amanda Wilson. And Amanda Wilson behaved with grace, etc., etc. The point is that Amanda Wilson has not been deprived of anything. But Henrietta Manners, Judith Goodman, in collusion with Mike Tyrrell, the THCH, and the others, racist employees in the Town Hamlets Council, took away the home, took away the life's work of the campaigner against racism. And the campaigner had not done anything wrong. They cooked up, Steve Hill, Mike Tyrrell, cooked up an excuse, a series of excuses that they have been cooking up to find a pretext to file a successful eviction application. And in 2011, they were successful because of Henrietta Manners. Now remember, Henrietta Manners is the same racist district judge who had already a record of evicting the same tenant or litigant. Because in 1993, on 10th of November 1993, on a Wednesday, Henrietta Manners took part in a conspiracy to mislead the tenant into thinking that there was a hearing of his application against the execution of the warrant of eviction that had been granted to Paul Varma by the same court earlier. And that eviction order had been given to Paul Varma as a direct result of the Royal London Hospital putting the property at auction in October 1987 and allowing that to be bought by somebody. This was Paul Varma, who then mounted a lying campaign to get the tenant evicted, and he eventually got the services of the racist Henrietta Manners, who allowed the completely anti-Muslim lying claim that the tenant had been a campaigner against Salman Rushdie. The tenant had never taken part in any public campaign against Salman Rushdie. The tenant had opinions and still has opinions which center on the role that Salman Rushdie played and was used to play in order to incite hatred against Muslims. That was not a criminal offense to point that out or to express an opinion. And anyway, eviction was nothing to do with any expression of an opinion, but that opinion even wasn't expressed. The application by Paul Varma included a false assertion, a reference to the tenant having taken part in televised campaign statements against Salman Rushdie. There never was such a statement. There never is. There never will be, because it never happened. So Henrietta Manners had already evicted the same person who is now the campaigner against racist attacks in 1996, and who was then followed up by another 11 years. 6 and 4, 10 years, 11 years of harassment and conspiracy. Eventually, she gave the go-ahead to the application by Mike Tyrrell and THCH to evict the same person who is now campaigning against racist attacks. Now, going back to the Royal London Hospital and going back to the other things, we shall be doing that. But at the present time, we look at this, and they're saying they've got even this person who has come out of the hiding hole. The person is named as Kevin Sadler, acting chief executive of HM Courts and Tribunal Service, has condemned the totally unacceptable behavior and promised to investigate the complaint made by Alexander Wilson, who specializes in criminal and family cases. Now, there were complaints by the victim and target of the attacks by Henrietta Manners and Steve Hill and Mike Tyrrell and other racists. There were complaints to the court that Henrietta Manners was wrong and she was abusing her position, as there were complaints to the Judicial Complaints Authority. Now, this is the kind of main kind of overarching kind of outfit, the HM Courts and Tribunal Service. HM Courts and Tribunal Service routinely dismisses complaints against judges, against members of the judiciary and members of the admin staff in the courts. So in the years since Mike Tyrrell issued that circular dated the 23rd of December 1996 to Colin Cormack and Keith Brown in the housing section, because Tyrrell knew them, and even if he didn't know them, he was abusing his position as a manager in Bethnal Green South. In 96, he was still in post as an employee of Tower Hamlets Council. And it was still for 10 years before he took over as the chief executive of the Tower Hamlets Community Housing, in control of thousands of council properties. And immediately upon taking over the control, he mounted first of a series of eviction attacks against the campaigner, against racist attacks. Now, this is something that had to be understood as happening. But there is nothing in the structure of the court system that can allow a victim of such brazen criminality and criminal abuse of the court system and the council system and the DWP, that allows a victim to go and seek redress. There is nothing like this email dated the 26th of September 2011 from Natasha, this woman Natasha Kumalo from the Judicial Complaints Authority, is typical of thousands of rejection letters that are sent to people who complain about abuse of position, racist abuse by the judges and members of the judiciary in this country. That is the reality. Thousands. Even a sitting kind of recorder and a quote judge, part-time judge, who was disciplined by the court system for expressing a very mild opinion about the fact that the court system in this country is racist. He found the struggle to get his kind of rebuke. He was rebuked officially. So his rebuke overturned. It took a lot of energy. We have published series of critical opinions about him personally because of his record as a dishonest person in impersonating the image of a genuine campaigner against racist violence and attacks, because he comes from Liverpool and he abused and exploited the 1981 riots, or so-called, in 1981 and since, to get himself promoted in many kind of positions. So we condemned him for his dishonesty on that record. We did not condemn him for challenging the racist kind of judicial bureaucracy that he was fighting. And he was only rebuked by the judicial bureaucracy, the racist judicial bureaucracy, on the basis that he had expressed an opinion that the racist judiciary was racist. The British English judiciary was racist. And he did that during the kind of immediate aftermath of the ruling against Lutfur Rahman, the then elected mayor of Tower Hamlets, who was ousted from his office by the election commissioner Richard Morey on the 23rd of April 2015. So the experience of Alexandra Wilson, with the way she is being treated as a kind of heroine, as if she has done a campaign, is extraordinarily in contrast with the racist status quo that all of this, including the Guardian won't publish anything critical against any racist judge and has not published anything critical against any racist judge, nor has the Times, nor has the Telegraph. So we shall continue with the look at the Telegraph and see if the Telegraph has got any room to talk about Alexandra Wilson. And then we shall talk about the other parts of the Boris Johnson fronted cabal. The Telegraph is the Boris graph, which the name we have given to the Daily Telegraph because of its complete corrupt, complicit role and association and partnership with Boris Johnson. And the payment to Boris Johnson of millions of pounds and millions of pounds worth of publicity to Boris Johnson over the years. Now, as we suspected, the Telegraph is also doing quite a major kind of story. Here is the story about Alexander Wilson, a criminal and family barrister, an author of In Black and White. Now, she's only 25, so she hasn't got a lot of experience. But they are treating her as if she has got about 50 years of experience as a licensed law trader. So, as I said, in the days and weeks to come, there will be more evidence of why they are giving her the publicity. I do not say that in resentment. I say that in contrast, in context. And the black barrister from Liverpool, Peter Harbert, is a QC, and he has got a promotion, a lot of promotion for himself on the back of the struggle of the victims of racism in Liverpool that took part in many protests in 1981. And Peter Harbert emerged as the sole singular personnel kind of successful beneficiary of all these protests. And he is not ordinarily against racism, and he has not taken part in any campaign against the judiciary and its racism that has been on behalf of other victims of racism. He only came to prominence by pointing out the fact that he was rebuked for speaking out against racism in the judiciary. So the Telegraph adds this kind of factual point in the last paragraph. The incidents concerning involving Alexandra Wilson come after figures revealed people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds were less likely to be successful when applying to become a judge, and only 9% are senior barristers. Now, I have got an exclusive, world exclusive, historic revelation to add here. 9% are barristers. I was almost given a license in 1973. I was given a license in 1973. Now, how many years is it? 47 years ago. That was a year before David Neuberger, who retired in 2017 as the president of the Supreme Court, got called to the bar. So he was 1 year behind me, David Neuberger. Where would I be? Would I have been the first president of the Supreme Court? That remains to be answered. Now, I say that nearly because a group of barristers in practice at the time had agreed to recommend me as their successful pupil, which is all that was needed in 1973. And it was messed up. The details are not important. The fact is that I would have been a practicing barrister 1 year ahead of the first president of the Supreme Court, David Neuberger, who was called a year after I nearly got called. Now, this is the evidence that I am basing all of this on. That it is not only a one-off thing, it is a persistent, very dangerously persistent violation of all the treaties and charters and agreements and declarations and conventions of which the UK remains signatory, about human rights, about personal liberty, freedom, and all the other things. I was blocked by a racist called Barbara Bates. Barbara Bates was the main admin person in control of the behavior at Lincoln's Inn at the time. So Barbara Bates blocked me because I told her that her questioning me, nothing to do with my abilities, the way she questioned me at several encounters I had with her, I said it was wrong, it was prejudiced. That did not take away my knowledge, my ability, my skills, or whatever. But she thought that I was not fit to be given. Just all I needed was a letter from the Lincoln's Inn, and that would have been it. That was in 1973. So Barbara Bates, I'm naming the racist as part of the evidence, exclusive evidence. And I'm saying this while discussing the case of Alexander Wilson, aged 25. Now, where was Alexander Wilson in 1973? She wasn't anywhere. She was only born in the 1990s, mid-1990s, 95, 94, whatever. 94, 84, 74. It's 21 years after I almost got called in by the Lincoln's Inn, and 20 years or more just after David Neuberger got called in as a barrister by the Lincoln's Inn. Now, the reason I wanted to explain this is to show the evidence. This is absolutely not available anywhere. This kind of evidence is not available anywhere. So for the last 47 years, well, more than that, but since that incident, 47 years since that incident of my being blocked by a racist at Lincoln's Inn, I have been continuing to study the law and practice the law in defending other people, not in the racistly restricted arenas of being mostly inside the court system, outside. And I have defended more people's rights, more people's homes, more people's liberties than any single licensed law trader alive on the planet can say they have done in any comparable setting anywhere. And so therefore what I am saying is that the legal system is completely corrupt and criminal. It's racist and it's ignorant, and it is a defiance, and it's a break. It's in breach of all the agreements, declarations, conventions, and charters that the UK remains signatory to. The leading declaration and the treaty is the Treaty of Rome, 1950. And the Treaty of Rome has been followed at various intervals and various kind of sequential kind of events by most of the statutes and acts of parliament concerning the protection of human rights, which are directly the results of the founding aims behind the United Nations. And the United Nations, which is, quote, celebrating, to quote the preacher man, Anthony Guterres, the current Secretary General, the 75th anniversary this week, has not been kept up to date. It has not been maintained in upholding the very declarations that it was founded to achieve, the aims. And I'm saying that the UK, having produced, as Ed Miliband said correctly, a number of contributors who drafted these declarations, many of these treaties and declarations and conventions. The UK has lagged behind, as has the USA. The USA has lagged behind even more than the UK. That's not a comfortable comparison. It doesn't do credit to either the UK or the USA. The United Nations was founded after the collapse of the League of Nations. So there has been a tendency among people across the world, concerned, thoughtful, and compassionate people from all backgrounds in the world, to find a way away from conflict, away from mass murder, genocide, robbery, colonialism, imperialism, oppression, and denial of the due process. This is one phrase: due process, rule of law. These are the two phrases that mean so much more than they actually say. And most of the United Nations member states, which are being misrepresented this week and have been misrepresented this week by most of the speakers who have spoken on behalf of their governments. And these speakers, most of them, I'm not saying every single one of them, the most of them have been engaged in violating the United Nations charters, declarations, Treaty of Rome, and all the other implied and actually consequent kind of follow-up instruments for upholding human rights, rule of law, access to justice, fair hearing, and all the rest of it. Now, what I have summarized in each broadcast, and I can only summarize, are the summarized versions of this thick kind of evidence written down, this thick. And I have been writing not as a kind of diarist, but as part of the action, as part of the campaign. Every day, I've been writing stuff, factual stuff. And the engagement has been forced on me by the enormity of the obstructions that keep coming in my way and in the way of the others who are targeted by the lawless regimes. In the case of the UK, the regimes are to be found at the local level, the local council. Every local council is a conspiracy against the local community. I'm not saying that because I have no kind of alternative, substantive thing to say, but that is the basis of my assertion, the substance. I've been examining the substance of the behavior of each council regime concerned. And based on the evidence of literally thousands of decisions made by local councils in this country that I have studied, examined, engaged about over the last nearly 50 years, I can say that democratic deficit is the biggest challenge to the future of this society. And to put it in context, what Noam Chomsky has been reportedly telling the New Statesman and Society, which I call New SS. Noam Chomsky has been given a predictable, prominent spot in the New Statesman. new SS. But as I had said before this particular interview, I saw the interview today, but even before I read this, I had already known about Chomsky. And I had said, and I'll say it again in an updated sentence, Chomsky is overly celebrated and kind of lauded in Asia, and I'm sure in Africa and in parts of Europe. But Chomsky is himself in denial of racism. Because in the whole piece as published by the new SS, there is no mention of racism or race. And the same applies to empire, imperialism, colonialism. None of those words or concepts occur in the lengthy piece that has been published, and I've seen online only, but I'm sure this is the same content or copy that the New Statesman in print would contain. And this is the evidence of why the judiciary in UK and in US, in the other kind of jurisdictions where the judicial system is structured after the so-called model based on the British original so-called. And the celebration this past week also in the USA of the life and legacy of the Supreme Court judge who's died, Ruth Ginsburg, has to be seen in the context. During her tenure in the Supreme Court, what major landmark case did she produce, or ruling did she produce, or analysis did she produce of the absolutely thick, racist, anti-black status quo in the judicial system in the USA? What did she produce? That is a question. It cannot be answered chapter and verse in a broadcast like this, but that question should take viewers and inquisitive students of justice, universally defined justice, to quest for the answer, the evidence, the clues. And if there are not enough clues and enough answers, enough foundations on which to justify kind of lauding Ruth Ginsburg the way that she has been lauded in every respect, including in the huge sum of money that has been raised comparatively for in her memory. What role did she play? And the same applies to the lawyer politicians. Barack Obama in the USA, and here Tony Blair. What role for justice did they play, have they played while in office? And what, if any, changes to bring about an end to the racist status quo in the judicial bureaucracy and corrupt establishment of the law in the USA and in the UK, in the case of Obama and Blair, has each of them brought? None, nothing. Whatever changes Tony Blair has been associated with have been completely artificial, and they do not stand the scrutiny of reality, the scrutiny of the truth, the scrutiny that is warranted by the need and the cry and the entitlement, the full entitlement for justice of the victims of injustice, victimized by the abuse of the corrupt legal system and bureaucracy. Has Alexander Wilson been described as a campaigner against racism in the English judicial system? No. And that is the answer. She won't be. Because if she were known to be opposing, let alone campaigning against the racist, corrupt judicial bureaucracy, she would not be given this coverage. No way. She would not be given this coverage, especially as the main kind of heroine she's been painted as. They have not named the source of the revelation that the Telegraph refers to in the last paragraph. The incidents, that is, incidents that are associated with Alexander Wilson's experience in the court, come after figures revealed people from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic backgrounds were less likely to be successful when applying to become a judge, and only 9% are senior barristers. So the source of that revelation will become obvious, as I said before, in the days and weeks and months to come. And that revelation, whatever the source is, will only be evidence of the system, the corrupt racist system, trying to continue and absorb this racism being found in its perpetuation. And one point that has to be added in context and in topical kind of mode is the fact that a licensed law trader named Keir Starmer, he's also a QC and also served as the Director of Public Prosecutions for 5 years, during which time literally hundreds of thousands of cases were processed by the Director of Public Prosecutions and the police and other tributary agencies. In the years that he was in post, this Keir Starmer, as the DPP, Director of Public Prosecutions, he did not create any waves or ripples in the public life or in public awareness by initiating or taking part in the initiation of or initiating of a single anti-corruption, anti-racist action, either in the police behavior, because the police only investigate apparently crimes, and it's the Crown Prosecution Service, which is headed by the Director of Public Prosecutions, that decides makes the final decision as to who is to be prosecuted and who is not. And if any amount of evidence of the encounters between the Black people of whatever background, Africa or Asian, and the police and the local councils and the court system and the other agencies of the state, if any objective study is made and the count is taken of the encounters, the outcome and the content and the conclusion inevitably will have to be overwhelmingly one of showing overwhelming illegality done by the authorities and the agencies and the personnel against the person in the street, the Black person, the Asian person, the minority person, to use the words used by the Daily Boris Graf. And there is no reference whatsoever to any of this in the proceedings, in the deliberations of the Labour Party conference, which is currently ongoing online remotely. In fact, Keir Starmer launched his own spiel by targeting very subtly and very cleverly, craftily, targeting those campaigning against racism in the Labour Party. That's what he did. That is how he staged his own appearance as the leader of the Labour Party in the remote kind of session of the Labour Party this week. So I would say that the apology for Black barrister, repeatedly mistaken for defendant, is a headline that only kind of retort to this particular coverage, not in the least suggesting that Alexandra Wilson is at fault. She has her reasons for not being a campaigning lawyer, but she is being used here, and she may personally get, to use a Thatcherite word, preferment sooner, much sooner than most licensed law trading black persons will get, and much sooner and much more really than any of the thousands of black people, African people experiencing racism, racist discrimination, racist obstruction, exclusion, and barriers caused by other racists and rubber stamped by the racists making the decision through and in the courts of law, so-called, at every level. Magistrates court, county courts, crown courts, high courts, various divisions of the high court and other courts and the tribunals. So we shall be continuing part C in about half an hour's time. So this is coming to 22 minutes to 10 in the evening. That is GMT on Friday, the 25th of September 2020.